Ethan loved order. He was a man who believed in structure, patterns, and the quiet rhythm of consistency. At 36, he had built a life most men would envy, a successful career as a financial advisor, a home designed down to the color of grout, and a beautiful wife, Claire, who, despite her mysterious past, made every evening feel like a sanctuary. They had candlelit dinners even on weekdays, shared playlists, and journaled in matching leather-bound notebooks. But the one thing missing, the one variable Ethan couldn't account for, was a child. Claire, 34, was graceful in a way that made Ethan often feel like he was dreaming. Her laughter was soft but deliberate, like someone who knew its effect. Before Ethan, she had once been in love, intensely, disastrously, with a man named Jared. Someone Ethan never met but whose name lingered in Claire's past like cigarette smoke. Jared had vanished years ago under vague whispers of misconduct and a ruined reputation. Claire never spoke of him directly, only once mentioning that her time with him ended in pain and complications. It was Claire who brought up IVF. She waited until a quiet Sunday morning, after coffee and croissants, when the sun fell in soft ribbons across the kitchen tile. She sat beside Ethan, took his hand, and said, "I need to tell you something." Ethan's heart clenched. Those words never prefaced anything good. "I can't have children the normal way," she continued. "Something happened in college. An infection. The doctors told me years ago. But there's a way. IVF. We'd need a donor, someone anonymous." Ethan, stunned but trying to be strong, nodded slowly. He loved her. If this was the path to having a family, he would walk it with her. He didn't ask too many questions. He didn't want to make her relive pain. Or perhaps, deep down, he didn't want to find out more than what was offered. Claire took control of the process. Every appointment, every medical file, every decision, she handled it. Ethan signed forms when needed, trusted the clinics she chose, and followed along with the sense of detachment he mistook for peace. When their son was born, Ethan felt overwhelmed by joy. The boy had Claire's soft features, her eyes, her smile, but something itched at him, like a note out of tune. The curve of the nose, the shape of the ears, things Ethan chalked up to donor genetics. Still, Claire was oddly evasive whenever Ethan suggested a follow-up with the pediatrician or a simple curiosity about blood type. The doctors said there's no need to poke him unnecessarily. She would smile, a little too rehearsed. Let's just enjoy him. Ethan wanted to believe, and so he did. It was Natalie, Ethan's younger sister, who noticed, a lab technician with a sharp eye and a sharper memory. She visited one afternoon and spent time with the baby. Later that night, she texted Ethan, "Have you ever done a DNA test just to be sure? He doesn't really look like you." Ethan replied with a chuckle emoji and a casual, "He's perfect the way he is." But Natalie couldn't let it go. Something about the child's bone structure, the skin tone, the way his left eyelid creased when he laughed, it nagged at her like unfinished data. One evening, under the pretense of fixing a toy the baby had broken, she collected a few strands of hair from the child's blanket. She didn't tell Ethan, not yet, because Natalie knew, sometimes, the truth is too heavy to give without preparation. And this truth, it was going to split something wide open. Meanwhile, Ethan lay beside Claire that night, watching her sleep. He listened to the even cadence of her breath, the twitch in her lip that signaled she was dreaming. He wondered what she saw. Was it the future they built, or the past she buried? He reached out, brushing a lock of hair from her forehead, whispering words she didn't hear. "I trust you." But trust, he would soon learn, isn't always a seed you plant. Sometimes, it's a trap you step into, softly, willingly, without even knowing the ground is about to give way. Natalie waited 3 days before showing Ethan the report. 3 days of rehearsing how to say the words. 3 days of watching her brother beam every time he changed a diaper, kissed a forehead, or whispered lullabies into small, sleepy ears. When she finally placed the envelope on the table, she didn't speak, she just looked at him, eyes already welling, as if mourning something that hadn't died yet, but would. Ethan opened the envelope casually, expecting a curiosity, a technical anomaly Natalie wanted to clarify. But the numbers weren't just confusing, they were damning. No shared alleles, 0% biological relationship. He stared at the words as if they'd been written in fire. The room, once warm with evening light, dimmed around him. He looked up slowly, his mouth open but soundless. "This can't be right," he finally said. Natalie said nothing. She had triple-checked, used 2 labs. She didn't want it to be right either. Ethan went home that night a hollow man. Claire met him at the door, baby in arms, wearing the same silk robe he had bought her for their 3rd anniversary. Her smile faded when she saw his face. He didn't speak until they were alone in the kitchen. And even then, it was a whisper, "Who is the donor?" Claire, her knuckles went white around the edge of the counter. Her breath hitched, just once. Then she said it, barely audible, "You wouldn't understand." But Ethan wasn't asking for understanding. He was demanding truth. "Jared," she said, finally, as if pulling the word from her own throat. The donor was Jared. Ethan staggered back like she'd struck him. The name, Jared, wasn't just from her past. It was infamous. Ethan remembered the scandals, the lawsuits, the whispered rumors in university forums. Jared, the golden boy turned pariah. Claire had always defended him, said it was a vendetta, a misunderstanding. Ethan thought it was just loyalty to an old wound. He never thought she would. "You said you wanted a child," she said, voice shaking. "I wanted that too. I just wanted something of him to live on." Ethan's rage was cold, slow, terrifying. "You lied to me. You forged medical documents. You signed my name. You built this whole thing on a corpse. You wouldn't have agreed," she snapped. "You would have said no. You would have taken that choice from me." Ethan packed a bag that night and left. The next morning, he spoke with a lawyer. The case built quickly: fraud, medical deception, emotional distress. He had evidence, statements, expert analysis. Claire, however, had something else: preparation. Her lawyer, sharp and strategic, filed countersuits, claimed mutual consent, presented documents with Ethan's signature, perfect forgeries. The media caught wind of the story. Wife uses disgraced ex as donor, husband seeks justice. But the headlines didn't help Ethan. If anything, they turned him into a spectacle. Clients left. Contracts were frozen. He was no longer a man seeking truth, he was a scandal magnet. During the hearings, Claire wept strategically, presented herself as a victim of infertility trauma, framed Ethan as emotionally unstable, controlling. She produced email chains, fabricated, but convincing, where Ethan had supposedly approved the donor. The judge ruled in her favor. There was insufficient evidence to prove intentional fraud. Ethan lost, not just the case, but access, custody, control. Most of the assets were in Claire's name, tied up in trusts she managed. Ethan walked out of court not defeated, but transformed. Justice had failed him, so he began planning something else. Not revenge, correction. Because if the law couldn't acknowledge what was stolen from him, then he'd build his own justice system, paper by paper, clause by clause, until Claire thought she had everything, while he quietly made sure she had nothing. And the child wasn't the enemy, but the child would be the axis. Because sometimes, legacy doesn't come from blood. It comes from who controls the story. Ethan didn't scream, didn't throw anything, didn't collapse into tears. Instead, he became quieter, more deliberate, every movement measured, every word calculated. There was no catharsis, no dramatic shattering of plates or shouting into empty rooms. What replaced grief wasn't rage, it was design. In that stillness, as the walls of his life collapsed, a new architecture began to rise inside him. He wouldn't fight Claire with noise. He would fight her with silence. Precision, paper. He stopped asking questions, stopped confronting her, even when she floated around the house with nervous energy, trying to compensate with affection or apology. Ethan offered nothing more than mild, almost indifferent civility. Claire interpreted his calm as distance. In truth, it was preparation. To the world, Ethan was simply a man navigating heartbreak. At work, he claimed he needed time to restructure, which was only half a lie. He withdrew from public speaking engagements, cancelled client meetings, and began to dedicate every waking hour to studying. Not psychology, not healing, law, inheritance law, guardianship frameworks, probate loopholes. He immersed himself in obscure tax shelters and irrevocable trusts. And when the legal jargon became too dense, he hired someone who spoke it fluently, an old law school dropout turned fixer. A man who had once helped corporations disappear wealth through carefully structured shells. Ethan didn't want revenge. He wanted correction. He wanted to build a mechanism so flawless, so elegant, that Claire would never see it coming. Quietly, Ethan began to shift everything. He sold off minor assets, investment condos, offshore accounts, assets Claire didn't even know existed. He routed funds through staggered accounts and reallocated ownership to a new legal entity, a family trust in the name of the child. Claire's greatest pride, the child she had fought to bring into the world on her terms, became the unwitting keystone in Ethan's grand design. The child would own everything. But Ethan would be the only trustee. He rewrote his will, removed Claire from every clause, reassigned beneficiary roles, ensured that in the event of his death, Claire would be entitled to nothing but a courtesy copy of the documentation. Everything went to "my son," a legal phrase that echoed hollowly in Ethan's mind. But one he clung to. Not out of affection, but control. The child wasn't an enemy. The child was a symbol, a lever, to reinforce the illusion of reconciliation. Ethan changed his tone at home. He began cooking again, left affectionate notes, tucked the child into bed with stories and lullabies. Watching Claire's guarded relief gradually soften, he whispered promises of starting over, and staged moments of intimacy just believable enough to lull her. Claire mistook his compliance for healing. She thought the nightmare was receding. In truth, she was drifting deeper into the trap. And when the time came, Ethan executed the final act. They signed the last round of documents together over dinner, papers she hadn't read thoroughly. Convinced by the warmth of his voice and the light in his eyes. She didn't notice that her name was absent from the ownership declarations. That the custody clauses didn't include shared rights. That the financial pathways no longer led to her accounts. That night, Ethan packed one bag. No dramatic goodbye, no confrontation, just a letter, neatly folded, placed on her vanity. You wanted him. You said he was a gift. Well, now he's yours. Entirely. Raise him, love him, explain him, but don't ask why he bears my name. That's your price to pay. He took a red-eye flight out of the country. The next morning, the house was locked, the accounts unreachable, the trust, now airtight and inaccessible to Claire, stood between her and everything she thought she had secured. She woke up to a nursery filled with toys and silence. No crying, no bottle warming, just the creak of a rocking chair and the rustle of legal papers she could never undo. Her emails bounced. Her calls never returned. The lawyers shrugged. There is nothing left in your name, they said. Ethan hadn't destroyed her life with fury. He had edited her out of his narrative. Left her as a footnote. Because justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes, it signs quietly in ink. And Claire had everything she ever claimed to want. Except control. And in Ethan's new order. That was the cruelest punishment of all. The morning after Ethan vanished, Claire stood barefoot in the middle of the nursery. The sun, once warm and golden, now filtered through the curtains in a way that felt hostile, too bright, too sharp. The silence was unfamiliar, like the breathless pause after an accident, when the world hasn't caught up to what it just witnessed. The crib was still made. Toys arranged with mathematical precision. A rocking chair slowly creaked from where she'd nudged it unknowingly. But there was no baby in her arms. No Ethan in the kitchen. No illusion left to cradle. At first, she assumed it was a mistake. A power outage, perhaps, affecting their bank logins. A temporary glitch. She called Ethan. No answer. She emailed. Bounced back. She drove to his office. Vacant. She called the firm managing their portfolio. A new voice answered. Due to a change in trustee authorization, we cannot disclose information to you at this time. It wasn't until she went through the kitchen drawer, where Ethan always kept spare keys and old receipts, that she found the second letter. It was shorter than the first. You signed everything. Your thumbprint, not mine, your name, in ink. There's nothing left for you to challenge. If you need money, ask your donor. Claire screamed, not in a cinematic way. Not a long, operatic wail. It was jagged, guttural, animal, and short, because she knew, almost instantly, that he was right. She hired a lawyer, then another, then 3. They all came back with the same response: airtight. The transfers had been legal, voluntary, notarized, documented. She had been maneuvered, and every step was hers. Everything was still in the name of the child. But without Ethan's signature as trustee, Claire couldn't touch a dollar. Not the house, not the accounts, not the business shares. She had, in essence, built a shrine to her own manipulation, and Ethan had sealed it shut. When Jared showed up 2 months later, Claire was living in a 2-bedroom apartment above a laundromat. He looked thinner, more tired, but not regretful, just resigned. I heard what happened, he said. I want to be a father. Claire laughed in his face. Not because it was funny, because it was tragic. You can barely be a person. Jared left without another word, and Claire sat alone on a couch that wasn't hers, staring at a wall she hadn't painted, cradling a child who looked at her with increasing distance. The boy began asking questions, small ones at first. Why don't we live in the old house? Where is Daddy? Claire offered half-truths, vacant reassurances, until one day, she found him holding a notebook Ethan had left behind. Inside, a message written in blocky, deliberate script. You were conceived through betrayal. But you are not a mistake. I chose to love you. Even if she didn't choose to tell the truth. Claire ripped the notebook from his hands. Screamed. He stared at her, not with fear, but with something worse, disappointment. As if he had glimpsed the beginning of a truth and wanted to understand it, but she had slammed the door shut. Why did you lie to Daddy? He asked. She slapped the counter. Not him, never him, but the noise made him flinch. He ran to his room, locked the door. From that day on, the boy grew colder, not defiant, not cruel, just distant, like he was building a quiet archive of grievances. Claire tried to overcompensate, gifts, outings, praise, but the questions never stopped, and her answers never satisfied. She developed insomnia, then anxiety, then depression. She stopped trusting reflections, felt eyes in the mirror judging her. Ethan's eyes, the child's eyes, her own. In her apartment, there was only one framed photo. The baby, moments after birth, still red, still wrinkled, unaware, pure. Claire stared at that photo every night before bed. Not because it brought comfort, but because it reminded her there had once been something real, something unbroken. But even that, she feared, had been a lie. And now, the name the child carried, Davis, wasn't just Ethan's legacy. It was a monument, a mark of what Claire had lost. Not just a husband, not just wealth, but the narrative, the control. And slowly, she began to understand. She had given birth to the son of a man she used, and raised him to become the mirror she could never look into. Claire aged in quiet obscurity. The world moved on without her. Swiftly and without ceremony, her reflection changed year by year. More lines, more weight in the eyes, less certainty in the mouth, but the apartment stayed the same. Small, dim, rented, a place where memories echoed louder than voices. And in that silence, she raised the only thing she had left, her son, the boy with the name she could never quite erase, Davis. He grew tall, intelligent, achieving. At school, he excelled, in sports, in writing, in speech. Teachers called him mature beyond his years. Friends noted his sharp mind, his reluctance to trust. Claire saw it all and said nothing, because deep down, she knew where that came from. He never asked much about Ethan. But when he did, it was sharp, surgical. Why did he leave? Did you cheat? Did you lie? Questions that pierced through her defenses no matter how carefully she'd built them. Claire lied, then adjusted the lies, then stopped answering. One evening, when he was 16, he came home holding a printout. A scholarship announcement, a full ride to a European academy, funded by an anonymous donor. The name on the foundation wasn't Ethan's. But Claire knew. At the bottom of the letter was a note, for the boy who carries the name. Not the blood. He handed it to her, watched her reaction, said nothing. Weeks later, he asked the question she feared most. What is my real name? Why isn't Dad listed on my birth certificate? Who is Jared? Claire froze. In the silence that followed, she felt the weight of every decision collapse in on itself. She began to answer, then stopped, then began again. Eventually, all she said was, "It's complicated." But that wasn't enough. He had already found Ethan's journal, had already read the note, had already drawn conclusions, and the damage wasn't that he knew. The damage was that he no longer cared to ask. He moved out a year later, went abroad, studied law, then philosophy, wrote essays about moral frameworks and fractured truths, gave talks titled, "Inheritance Beyond Blood." Claire watched from afar, watched his name grow, watched the Davis surname become synonymous with resilience, intellect, and legacy, not hers, his. At one ceremony, she saw him on screen, smiling, holding a medal. Around him, colleagues, journalists, sponsors. One banner read, "Son of Davis." No mention of Claire. She returned home and wrote a letter she never intended to send. A confession, a surrender. In shaky handwriting, she began, "I thought I won. I thought getting what I wanted, your name, your child, your legacy, meant I had beaten you. But I didn't win, I just bought a name. And names don't hold hearts." She folded the letter and placed it beneath her pillow. A nightly ritual, a kind of penance. The boy found it one winter evening when he returned briefly. He didn't cry, didn't rage. He just folded the letter and said, "Thanks for telling me." Claire died 2 years later in a hospice. No obituary, no funeral guests but one. Her headstone read, "Claire, 1988 to 2034." Beneath it, the engraver left a space. "Mother of." It was never filled in.